Hello ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. Spell batching just isn't working out for classic WoW, and is creating more issues, clunky gameplay and frustrations than it provides in terms of positives for authenticity, especially when it comes to PvP encounters, CC effects being mirrored, heals failing or interrupts just straight up not landing. It's been about 7 months since release now, and I feel that personally and as a community we have had time to let the effects of this system sink in and see how it holds up to modern scrutiny, and whether it's been a beneficial addition to the game or just an archaic shoehorning of artificial lag, because that's how it was back in the day. Let's head back to the past before I go on. Today is March 19th, 2019. Talks about Classic have been going on for some time now, and not just talks over when it will be out. People want to know what elements of vanilla will be preserved and in what fashion. We wanted an authentic vanilla experience. And at the time the pervading community mantra was no changes, and it meant what it meant. People just didn't want anything in the game that was never part of vanilla. Simple enough. The real emotion though I feel behind this phrase was that people didn't exactly have the most faith in Blizzard. Many people thought the game had taken a turn for worse, and considering we were midway through BFA at that point in time, it's kind of hard to argue with that. There was a worry that Blizzard would add on convenience factors to Classic that would change it up quite considerably, like LFD, LFR and others. And I was in agreement with no changes. After all, my attitude was, even if we end up with a game that has many parts that just take longer, I would rather that than anything from recent expansions tacked on as an afterthought, just to encourage a few more people to give it a shot, rather than go all in on creating something to mirror vanilla and letting it stand on its own merits. And I already know there's going to be some big smugs in the comments for this video. Oh, well, this was just obviously going to be a bad thing. The casuals are just finding out now. I guess I was just a bit ahead of the crowd. Thanks for the insight. So when batching was announced on the 19th of March 2019, it was met with rapturous applause. Myself included, by the way. I was hyped. Actions like this showed that Blizzard were actually taking an interest in delivering something that had been wished for and anticipated for years. It showed a level of care from the developers and the PR reps that we hadn't seen in a very long time. It wasn't just a glimpse of old World of Warcraft, but also of old Blizzard. And the crowd went wild. Look up any video from the time, look up any forum post, you're gonna see 99% positive comments about this decision. People loved it, fantastic. But let's do a quick recap around spell batching though, just so we're all on the same page here. Back in vanilla, your average nerd's PC and internet was bad. Really bad in fact, I know mine was. Laggy connections could vary so much. There may be one guy on 100 to 150 ping, whereas somebody else would regularly play on 250 to 300. That is a very big and very noticeable difference once you actually try going from one to the other. Spells were not consistent because of this in how they acted, the player side delay causing different interactions with spells depending on how good or bad their target's connection was. So Blizzard introduced spell batching. This alleviated player side connection issues by putting in a server side delay to spells and treating them as groups rather than individuals, where instead each spell acting as soon as the player plus regular server time takes place. It's now player plus spell batching delay. This smoothed the connection discrepancies and led to more consistent interactions in how spells work. They may not have been the best interactions, but at least they were reasonably consistent, as opposed to wildly varying all of the time. This was why batching was in vanilla. How much delay do you ask? On average around 200 ms. Blizzard may have tweaked it from this post of course. This seems to be the general consensus on the subject though. It's noticeable for sure. In the modern era of World of Warcraft, as the same post details here, Blizzard no longer batch spells and aim for each spell that's fired off to be dealt with by the server as soon as possible. This creates far more responsive and engaging combat, where reaction time and abilities matter a whole lot more. In Classic, you pretty much have to plan ahead when using certain spells. If you risk it, batching will punish you, and that doesn't feel great. Most private servers ditch batching because it's just not worth the effort to accurately reproduce when it's artificially making the game just an overall worse experience for the player. A while ago, a Burning Crusade server, Netherguard, launched with a focus on authentic PvP experience. People were hype, devs that care, just like Classic, and following the launch, players complained heals not landing, shields not landing, execute not doing any damage. Sound familiar? Eventually the devs ditched this system and players were largely happy because of it. So let's move on to batching in Classic 7 months in. I think it takes away more than it gives to the game. Batching used to exist to smooth different connections. Today's average ping is what, around 50 or below, I would say, for majority of players. Batching isn't fixing a problem, it's creating one. An old problem for an older time. It just doesn't make sense for spells or interactions to be artificially delayed when the rest of the game is running on modern hardware. The force lag honestly creates so many issues, clunky gameplay mechanics, and many classes just feel bad when your abilities go wrong because of this. Here are just a few issues that spell batching causes. Feign death into freezing trap is incredibly inconsistent. You have to stand still for a good second before using feign, or it may get batched as movement and not work at all. Using vanish on the same moment as you're hit by a melee attack and instantly getting broken out. You get spell batch from buying from shops. Spam clicking buying in large quantities almost never reflects the numbers of clicks that you actually do. Just healing in general, the sheer delay on Holy Shock and lay on hands is insane. You can't make a hero play with lay on hands. If a target is super low, the chance the heal will get batched with the target's death is just too high to risk you essentially pressing a button that deletes your mana bar and does nothing. You can actually receive overkill and overhealing in that order. Here's a fantastic example on why this happens from a blue post, and I'm going to read it through because it's so good. So the delay can feel bad just due to the somewhat laggy responsiveness feeling, but also because of the state of things can change during that time. For example, Holly, the Holy Priest, is healing Punky, the Brewmaster. Punky spikes low, and Holly hits Guardian Spirit in a panic. And if you don't know Guardian Spirit, it's just a spell that resurrects the target if they take fatal damage, basically. So the server verifies that Holly is able to cast it and that Punky is alive. The cast goes off, Guardian Spirit goes on cooldown, and a request is placed for the Guardian Spirit aura that prevents the dying to be placed on Punky. This request will be filled the next time the 400 ms timer loops, or whatever it is on Classic, which happens to be 320 ms from now. 250 ms later, the boss lands another hit on Punky, and Punky dies. Another 70 ms goes by and the Guardian Spirit aura request pops up and should be applied, but it's too late, the target has already died. That's why healing feels bad on Classic. The exact same thing can happen with Execute. You press the button, all your rage goes, and the target dies before the damage part lands. One positive that I can think of is that Elemental Mastery for Ellie Shamans will batch into always causing 2 spells to critically hit every single time, as long as you're close enough to your target. This is very consistent. I've leveled a Shaman. On Warlocks we used to be able to use Demonic Sacrifice on a demon as you entered an instance, and it would batch the cast with entering, so when you're inside you have the Demonic Sacrifice buff and the demon active. Seems like Blizzard have put a check on to manually remove this. I'm no longer able to recreate it, whereas it used to be super easy. Interrupts and spell batching are perhaps one of the worst offenders for me. Let me show you a rather shocking example. Here I am on my Shaman in the Burning Steppes. Next to me are some Scowling Broodlings. Very cool. These guys cast a fireball whenever they are not interrupted. Also very cool. Now Earthshock has a short 2-second interrupt on it. If I land my Earthshock right at the end of the enemy spellcast, it should interrupt it, but it doesn't. The cast still goes off. My interrupt has been batched with the end of the spellcast, and I just lost my interrupt cooldown and took damage because of artificial lag. That doesn't feel great. Want to see something even worse though? Check this out. If I was to pull one of these Broodlings, it starts casting Fireball instantly, right? But let's say I pull it with Earthshock. The Broodling starts its cast as I have aggro, and then gets interrupted. I'm interrupting a cast before it started. You think this is just luck? I'll do it again, and again, and again, and again, and again. This shouldn't be possible. This is taking more away in terms of player experience than it can ever give in terms of authenticity. Blizzard have gone to great lengths over the years to upgrade their server-side capabilities to match what the average player now has access to, because it's better. Whenever you hear complaining about PvP in Battle for Azeroth, which you do a lot, it's never about heals not landing, vanish bugging, or getting hit by a spell after having interrupted. The community has been so divided on what's good and what's bad for Classic WoW. There have been so many big changes, lack of progressive itemization and talents. Mages shouldn't have instant cast Arcane Explosion until 1.11. Paladins shouldn't have Greater Blessings until 1.8. These aren't just little amendments that have been made. Remember looking for Dungeon in Vanilla? Maybe not. It should be in the game by now. It was updated in patch 1.5 and we're coming up to patch 1.7. You know why it isn't? The near mention of looking for sends people into a frothing rage these days. Even though the system was pretty much useless in vanilla and nobody really used it, even after the Innkeepers got the update in 1.5 and the additional functionality of placing people in a queue. That's why whenever you talk to an Innkeeper, they have the little dungeon info part, I can guarantee you if Blizzard put this into the game and mentioned it in patch notes, the forums would be absolutely on fire. Game's dead, I knew this would happen, I'm unsubbing, even though it changes absolutely nothing that you can already do in the LFG channel. This has all been pretty negative so far, right? Sure. I don't like spell batching. It lowers my ability as a player to interact with others. The amount of times I've had a bad experience compared to a good one due to batching is extremely lopsided. But you know what? Spell batching isn't necessarily a bad idea, it's just not being implemented correctly. I don't think the current iteration is adding value to the game at all. The solution doesn't have to be just delete it completely and go to the system how retails handle spells, which is as soon as possible instead of being batched. I think at this point we're a good amount into Classic and you can say we have all now experienced spell batching. Saying it was obviously going to be bad before Classic came out is like calling a drop from a boss. You don't know it for sure, but you certainly want to self-gratify if you end up being right, which isn't a great approach to things in my opinion. Also, we don't know the background of Classic. Can it even be phased out? I would prefer the instant processing of spells like retail over batching, but that doesn't have to be the case. Could batching just be toned down to a lower arbitrary number? 100 ms? 50 ms? Could certain spells be moved onto a retail level server response? What if spells like interrupts, resource spenders, heals, hard CCs were processed instantly, whereas less important spells still had batching? It would be like a shared DR list for hard CC, but just for certain abilities that kind of need to be addressed instantly, not after around half a second. This does kind of defeat the point of batching overall doing this however, but it could be a middle ground, somewhere between those who see the value in certain interactions and the actual competitive integrity between high-end players. And looking forwards, I think if people are unhappy with batching now, if the Burning Crusade ever becomes a thing, I think batching will actually kill off Arena pretty fast. It dulls the competitive edge of players so severely. Either way, it's been a while now, and if batching went tomorrow, I bet there'd be just as much joy as when it was first announced. What are your guys' thoughts on this? I'd be really interested to hear your opinions on batching, and if you did want it gone, how so? I do hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. If you like what you see, give the video a like and subscribe as there's plenty more to come. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Take care. Bye.